The Gulf War, fought from 1990 to 1991, was a conflict between Iraq and a coalition of 35 nations led by the United States. The war was triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and it resulted in a decisive victory for the coalition forces. Here's the story of the Gulf War, covering its background and outcomes. The seeds of the Gulf War were sown in the complex political and economic landscape of the Middle East. Iraq, under the leadership of President Saddam Hussein, was facing significant financial difficulties in the late 1980s, largely due to the costs of the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. To recover economically, Hussein looked toward Kuwait, a small but oil-rich neighbor. Iraq accused Kuwait of overproducing oil, driving down prices and hurting the Iraqi economy. Additionally, Iraq claimed historical rights to Kuwaiti territory, arguing that Kuwait was historically part of Iraq. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces, numbering about 100,000 soldiers, invaded and quickly overran Kuwait. The invasion was met with international condemnation, and the United Nations Security Council passed resolutions demanding Iraq's immediate withdrawal. U.S. President George H.W. Bush led efforts to build a broad international coalition to oppose Iraq's aggression. The coalition included NATO members, Arab nations, and other countries from around the world. The U.S. and its allies began deploying troops to Saudi Arabia to protect it from a potential Iraqi invasion and to prepare for the liberation of Kuwait. This phase of the conflict, known as Operation Desert Shield, lasted from August 1990 to January 1991. Throughout late 1990, diplomatic efforts were made to resolve the conflict peacefully, but Saddam Hussein refused to withdraw from Kuwait. The UN set a deadline of January 15, 1991, for Iraq to withdraw, but Hussein ignored the ultimatum. With diplomacy exhausted, the coalition launched Operation Desert Storm on January 17, 1991. This marked the beginning of the combat phase of the Gulf War. The war began with a massive air campaign, which targeted Iraqi command and control centers, military infrastructure, and key civilian facilities. The coalition's air superiority was overwhelming, and within weeks, Iraq's ability to wage war was severely crippled. On February 24, 1991, the coalition launched a ground invasion to liberate Kuwait. Swiftly overwhelming Iraqi forces, the coalition forces, using superior technology and tactics, advanced rapidly through Iraq and Kuwait, encountering only sporadic resistance. As coalition forces approached, Iraqi troops began retreating from Kuwait. Many were caught in a devastating air assault on what became known as the Highway of Death, where hundreds of vehicles were destroyed and thousands of Iraqi soldiers were killed or captured. The Gulf War ended on February 28, 1991, after 42 days of intense fighting. President Bush declared a ceasefire, and Iraq accepted all UN resolutions, effectively ending the conflict. Kuwait was liberated, and the Kuwaiti government was restored. However, the country was left heavily damaged by the war, with its oil fields set ablaze by retreating Iraqi forces, causing environmental and economic devastation. Iraq suffers significant losses, with estimates of 20,000 to 35,000 soldiers killed and substantial damage to its military and civilian infrastructure. The war also caused widespread suffering among the Iraqi population, with food shortages and a devastated economy. Despite the defeat, Saddam Hussein remained in power in Iraq.